Is he my father? That's what Nancy Kim's 12-year-old son would ask her in exactly 17 minutes. But right now, she was trying to keep the unconscious billionaire in her trauma bay alive. The billionaire was Jonathan Cooney, her ex, the man who'd abandoned her 12 years ago, just days before she discovered she was pregnant. The boy waiting outside recovery was Maxwell, their son, the son Jonathan never knew existed because his powerful father had threatened Nancy into silence. And somehow, impossibly, Maxwell had been at the airport when Jonathan's plane crashed. Had ridden in the ambulance, had held his unknown father's hand all the way to this hospital. Now, Nancy had to save the man who broke her heart, so he could meet the son who would break his. Nancy Kim stopped believing in Christmas miracles, somewhere between her third double shift and her son's first question about why other kids had daddies. But she still worked Christmas Eve every single year. The emergency room was the one place where survival mattered more than sentiment, where her hands had purpose, where the chaos drowned out the loneliness of raising a son alone. And tonight, County General's ER was beautifully, brutally chaotic. Nancy, I need you on trauma too. Joseph Chen, the charge nurse, called across the bay. Nancy snapped her gloves into place. The smell hit first: antiseptic, blood, fear. Then the sound monitors beeping, families crying, residents shouting like it was war. Because, in a way, it was. Christmas Eve in the ER wasn't about magic. It was about keeping people alive long enough to see Christmas morning. What we got? Nancy approached the gurney where Leo Martinez was already checking vitals. Possible MI. 72, female, radiating pain. Nancy was already moving. This was her gift. Not tenderness though, she had that too. Her gift was absolute clarity in crisis. While others panicked, she saw the pattern. She'd learned that gift the hard way. 12 years ago, when Jonathan Cooney walked out of her life, Nancy had two choices: collapse or calcify. She chose steel. She chose survival. She chose to build a life for the baby growing inside her that Jonathan would never know about. And she'd built a good life. Maxwell was 12, now brilliant, kind, curious about robotics and why his eyes were green when hers were brown. She'd answered every question except the one that mattered most. Where's my dad? He wasn't ready to be a father, sweetheart, but I was ready to be your mother. Maxwell had stopped asking recently, but Nancy saw the way he studied other families, the way his face changed when adults asked about bringing parents to robotics competitions. He'd found something last week. Nancy knew because his questions had shifted from casual to careful. She was running out of time before the truth found its way out. But tonight wasn't about Maxwell's questions or the past she'd buried beneath years of night shifts. Tonight was about keeping strangers alive. BP stabilizing, Leo announced. Nancy wasn't magic, she was practiced. There was a difference. Rouse poked his head in. Chen needs you at the bay. Multi-vehicle, incoming. Nancy stripped her gloves and moved fast. The ambulance bay was where everything dangerous entered. Nancy had learned to read the energy before the doors opened. Tonight, the paramedics were running. That meant catastrophic. What do we have? Joseph was already positioned. Runway accident. Private jet, skidded on ice, hit a barrier. Head trauma. Possible internal bleeding. Vitals dropping. Nancy's training kicked in. Assess, stabilize, move. But then the stretcher passed under the lights, and Nancy's entire world tilted sideways. The unconscious man strapped to the gurney had a face she'd spent 12 years trying to forget. Sharp jawline, dark hair threaded with silver, scar above his left eyebrow from the motorcycle accident in college. Jonathan Cooney. Her Jonathan. The man who chose a startup over her. The man who believed his father's lies about love being distractions. The man who walked away 3 days after she discovered she was pregnant. The father of her son. Nancy couldn't breathe. And then she heard the voice that shattered her completely. Mom? Her head snapped toward the sound. Maxwell, her 12-year-old son, stood beside the stretcher, his small hand clutching Jonathan's limp fingers, his face pale with terror, his green eyes, Jonathan's eyes swimming with tears. Maxwell? Nancy choked out. What was he doing here? He was supposed to be at the robotics club event across town. I saw the crash, Maxwell stammered, words tumbling out fast. My robotics team was on a field trip, touring the private aviation terminal. We were learning about engineering systems. I saw the jet skid from the observation deck, and his voice cracked. I ran. Security tried to stop me, but when the paramedics pulled him out, his eyes opened for just a second, and he grabbed my hand. He wouldn't let go, so they let me ride with him. Mom, I think he's dying. Time collapsed. Every carefully constructed wall Nancy had built around her secret, every lie of omission, every protected boundary gone. Her past and present were colliding under fluorescent lights, and she couldn't stop it. BP 70 over 40 and dropping, Joseph barked. Nancy, I need you. Nancy was frozen, staring at the unconscious man who'd once been her entire world, and the conscious boy who was now hers. Joseph grabbed her shoulder. Nancy, now. She snapped back. Training overrode trauma. Get him to trauma 1, Nancy commanded. I need a CT stat, full panel, type, and cross-match. Mom, is he going to be okay? Maxwell pleaded, still holding Jonathan's hand. Nancy's heart cracked open. Maxwell, sweetheart, I need you to go wait with Leo. No. Maxwell's jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded her exactly whose son he was. He needs me. Maxwell. I know him, Mom. Maxwell's voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know why, but I know him. Nancy's breath caught. He did know him. Blood knew blood, even when secrets tried to keep them apart. What was about to happen in this hospital would change everything. And there was no going back. Trauma. One smelled like every life or death moment Nancy had ever survived. Metallic blood. Sharp antiseptic. And underneath it all, the sour tang of fear. Jonathan's vitals flickered on the monitor. Unstable, dangerous, slipping. Pupils responsive but sluggish, Jensen announced, flashing a pen light. Possible subdural hematoma. We need imaging now. Nancy's hands moved on autopilot, checking IV lines, adjusting oxygen, monitoring the numbers that separated living from dying. But her mind was somewhere else. The coffee shop near campus had terrible lighting and worse coffee, but Jonathan loved it because nobody from his father's world would ever set foot inside. Tell me again why you want to waste a Stanford engineering degree on a startup that'll probably fail? Nancy had teased. Jonathan's eyes lit up the way they always did when he talked about code and dreams bigger than his father's expectations. Because failing at something I love beats succeeding at something I hate. He'd grabbed her hand. Besides, I've got you. That's the only success that matters. Nancy had believed him. God, she'd believed every word. Nancy, I need you focused, Joseph said quietly. She blinked back. Jonathan's blood pressure had dropped again. Pushing another unit of O-neg, she responded, voice steady even as her chest threatened to collapse. Maxwell stood in the corner, eyes fixed on Jonathan's face, shoulders rigid with fear that made 12-year-olds look ancient. Nancy wanted to hold him, wanted to tell him everything would be fine. But she'd learned years ago that some promises couldn't be kept. Maxwell, please, she tried again. Leo can take you. No. Maxwell's voice was small but absolute. I'm staying. Joseph glanced between them, sensing something beneath the surface. Why is this boy so attached to a stranger? Why does Nancy look like she's seeing a ghost? But Joseph was too professional to ask. Not yet. Not while Jonathan's life hung in the balance. Get him to CT, Jensen ordered. Page neurosurgery. The team moved like choreographed dancers, efficient, precise, desperate. As they wheeled Jonathan toward imaging, Nancy caught a glimpse of his face under harsh hallway lights. He looked older, harder. Success had carved lines around his eyes that love never had. But underneath all that, she could still see the boy who dreamed too big and loved too carelessly. And here's what you need to understand. Sometimes the people we lose don't stay lost forever. Sometimes they crash back into our lives in ways we never see coming. And if you've ever wondered whether second chances actually exist, stay with me. Because what happens next will either restore your faith in love or break your heart. Either way, you need to see it. The night Nancy discovered she was pregnant, Jonathan had been 3 days deep into a funding crisis. She'd held the positive test in shaking hands, sitting on the bathroom floor, trying to figure out how to tell him. When he'd come home at 2 a.m., exhausted and defeated, she'd made the mistake of thinking honesty was always the right choice. I'm pregnant. Jonathan had frozen in the doorway. What? I'm pregnant, Jonathan. About 6 weeks. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Nancy had ever heard. Not joy, not panic, not even fear. Just silence. And in that silence, something between them started dying. Vital stabilizing, Joseph called out. Nancy exhaled slightly. Stable wasn't safe, but it was better than slipping away. Maxwell had followed despite protests, hovering near the door like a shadow refusing to detach. You really care about this guy, huh? Rouse asked Maxwell. Maxwell nodded. I don't know why. I just do. Nancy's throat tightened. Children knew things adults spent years denying. Jonathan's father had shown up 3 days after Nancy told him about the pregnancy. Richard Cooney stood in Nancy's apartment like he owned it. My son has a future worth $50 million if this funding round closes. You think a baby fits into that equation? Nancy had stood her ground. I'm not asking for anything. I'm telling Jonathan because he deserves to know. He doesn't need to know. He needs to focus. Richard placed an envelope on her counter. Nancy never opened it, but she knew what was inside. Money. The universal language for go away. If you care about my son, you'll let him build what he's capable of building, without distractions. The word distractions had burned like acid. The CT showed exactly what Jensen feared, bleeding between Jonathan's brain and skull. Dangerous, but manageable with immediate intervention. We're taking him to surgery, Jensen announced. Prep or 3. As the team mobilized, Jonathan stirred. His eyelids fluttered. His fingers twitched. Then his lips moved. Nancy? The word was barely a whisper. Nancy stepped closer, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Jonathan, can you hear me? His eyes cracked open, unfocused, glassy, searching. Nancy. His hand reached for her. She caught it without thinking. His fingers were cold, weak, but the grip was desperate. I'm sorry, Jonathan's voice cracked. I messed up. I messed up so bad. Nancy's vision blurred. Was he talking about the crash? Or 12 years ago? Jonathan, you need to stay calm. Should have fought for you. His eyes rolled slightly. Should have chosen you. Then he was gone again, pulled back under by anesthesia and trauma. But the words hung in the air like ghosts. Joseph stared at Nancy. Rouse stared at Nancy. You know him, Joseph said quietly. Nancy swallowed hard. A long time ago. 1:14. 1. How long ago? Nancy couldn't answer, because Maxwell was standing right there, and the truth was a grenade with the pin already pulled. The morning Jonathan left, Nancy had woken to find him packing. What are you doing? My dad's right. I can't do this. The company, the baby, the responsibility, I'm drowning. Nancy. So you're leaving? I have to. Nancy had felt something inside her turn to stone. Then go. But don't come back. If you're leaving, really leave. Jonathan stopped at the door. I'm sorry, he'd whispered. And then he was gone. Nancy stood in that empty apartment, hand on her barely there belly, and made a promise. This baby would never feel unwanted. She'd kept that promise for 12 years. They wheeled Jonathan toward surgery. Maxwell tried to follow, but Nancy caught his arm. Maxwell, you can't go into surgery. You have to wait here. But what if his voice broke? What if he doesn't wake up? Nancy pulled him close. He's strong. He'll wake up. Maxwell pulled back, looking up with those devastating green eyes. Mom, there's something I need to ask you. Nancy's pulse spiked. Not now. Please, not now. Maxwell. Rouse said they need family DNA history for the surgery, but he doesn't have anyone, just me. Nancy's blood turned cold. You're not family, sweetheart, but I feel like I am. Maxwell's eyes searched hers. And he said your name. He knows you. It's complicated. Mom, Maxwell's voice dropped to a whisper. Please, tell me the truth. Do you know him? Nancy looked at her son, brilliant, intuitive, too smart for comfortable lies. She was out of time. Yes, Nancy finally admitted. I knew him, a long time ago. How? We were close, before you were born. Maxwell went very still. Nancy watched her 12-year-old son's mind work through the timeline. Mom, Maxwell whispered, is he? But before he could finish the question that would change everything, Leo appeared. Nancy, we need you in OR3. Jensen wants you monitoring vitals. You know his baseline better than anyone now. Nancy looked between Maxwell and the hallway. Stay here, Nancy told Maxwell firmly. Don't move. Mom. I mean it, Maxwell. Stay. She turned and followed Leo, knowing when she came back, nothing would ever be the same. Behind her, Maxwell stood alone in the hallway. I know him, Mom, Maxwell whispered to the empty air. I don't know why, but I know him. And somewhere deep in his 12-year-old heart, the truth he'd always suspected began crystallizing into certainty. What he was about to do would change 3 lives forever. Surgery took 4 hours. Nancy stood in the surgical observation area, hands pressed against the glass, watching Jensen work. Her eyes never left the monitors tracking Jonathan's vitals, anticipating problems before they happened, her ER instincts on high alert, even from outside the OR. She was a machine in those moments. Perfect, precise, empty of everything except keeping him alive. But the moment Jensen closed the last suture and announced, "He's stable," Nancy's knees buckled. She wasn't tired. She was terrified. Because Jonathan was going to wake up, and when he did, everything she'd built would start crumbling. Recovery Bay 4 was quieter than the main ER. Softer lighting, slower rhythms, the kind of space where bodies remembered how to heal. Jonathan lay motionless under thin white sheets, bandages wrapped around his head, monitors beeped steadily. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in a way the Billionaire CEO version never had. Nancy stood in the doorway, watching him breathe. This was the man she'd loved, with the kind of intensity that ruins you for anyone else. The man who'd chosen fear over her. And now he was here. In her hospital, on her shift, with their son waiting in the hallway. Mom? Nancy turned to find Maxwell hovering behind her, face pale, eyes red-rimmed. Is he okay? Nancy nodded. The surgery went well. He just needs rest. Maxwell stepped past her into the room, drawn to Jonathan like metal to magnet. Maxwell, you should go home. I'm not leaving. Maxwell moved to Jonathan's bedside. If he's not going to wake up for hours, then I'll wait hours. That stubborn jaw. Pure Jonathan Cooney genetics. Nancy sighed and pulled up a chair. If Maxwell was staying, she was staying. They sat in silence, listening to steady beeps and distant ER chaos. Then Jonathan stirred. His fingers twitched, eyelids fluttered. Breath changed shallow and quick, surfacing from deep water. Jonathan? Nancy leaned forward. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused and glassy. But the moment he saw her face, something shifted. Recognition crashed over him. Nancy, he whispered. Not a question, a prayer. Nancy's chest tightened. You're in County General. You had surgery. Nancy. He said her name again, testing whether she was real. You're really here. I'm your nurse. You're my Jonathan's face crumpled slightly, emotions too big for his drugged mind to contain. God, Nancy, I thought I'd never see you again. You shouldn't be talking. I looked for you. His hand reached weakly toward her. After everything fell apart, after my dad died, after I finally saw, I looked everywhere. Nancy's pulse hammered. Jonathan, I was so stupid. Tears leaked from his eyes. So goddamn stupid. You were right there. You loved me. And I walked away because I was scared and weak and— Stop, Nancy's voice cracked. Please stop. Because she couldn't do this. Not here. Not with Maxwell watching every word. Jonathan finally noticed the boy standing at his bedside. Who's this? Maxwell stepped closer. I'm Maxwell. I was there when you crashed. I rode with you. Jonathan studied him, really studied him, and Nancy watched recognition flicker. Not conscious recognition, something deeper. You look, Jonathan trailed off. You look familiar. People say that sometimes, Maxwell said quietly. How old are you? 12. Jonathan's gaze shifted to Nancy, questions forming. Is he? Jonathan's voice dropped. Is he yours? Nancy's mouth went dry. This was it. Yes, she managed. Maxwell is my son. Jonathan's eyes moved between them, Nancy's face, Maxwell's face, back again. And Nancy saw him doing the math. 12 years old, Nancy standing beside him, the boy with green eyes that matched his own. But he didn't ask the question. Not yet. Maybe the drugs were clouding his logic. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. He's beautiful, Jonathan whispered. You did good, Nancy. Real good. The tenderness in his voice shattered something inside her. Maxwell, meanwhile, was staring at Jonathan with intensity that made Nancy's skin prickle. You have a scar, Maxwell observed, pointing. Above your eye. Jonathan managed a weak smile. Motorcycle accident. Long time ago. What kind of motorcycle? Ducati. Stupidly fast. Even stupider rider. Maxwell's eyes lit up. I want to learn to code motorcycles, like build smart systems that prevent crashes. Jonathan's smile widened. That's brilliant. You into robotics? Yeah. My team just qualified for regionals. That's amazing, kid. What position? Lead programmer. Jonathan laughed softly. Of course you are. Nancy watched them talk father and son, separated by a decade of secrets, connected by invisible threads, neither understood yet. And Maxwell kept circling closer to the truth. Your eyes are green, Maxwell said suddenly. Yeah, Jonathan agreed. Mine too. I noticed. My mom's are brown. Nancy's heart stopped. Jonathan glanced at her, then back at Maxwell, something shifting behind his drugged expression. Genetics are funny, Jonathan said carefully. Really funny, Maxwell pressed, because I don't look like my mom much, but I look like you. The air changed. Nancy stood abruptly. Maxwell, that's enough. Same eyes, Maxwell continued. Same nose, same chin, same hands. He held his hand up next to Jonathan's. Look. Jonathan stared at their hands side by side. His fingers, Maxwell's fingers, mirror images. Maxwell, Nancy said firmly, outside, now. But Mom, now. Maxwell's jaw set, but he obeyed, moving toward the door. Nancy started to follow, desperate to escape before Jonathan's brain connected the dots. Nancy, wait. She froze. He's 12, Jonathan said quietly. Yes. And you said, we were close before he was born. Nancy couldn't breathe. We were close a long time ago, Jonathan. That's all you need to know right now. Nancy, you need rest. We'll talk when you're stronger. She fled before he could stop her, following Maxwell into the hallway. Maxwell stood against the wall, arms crossed, face flushed with anger and confusion, and hope. Why won't you tell me? He demanded. Tell you what? The truth. Maxwell's voice broke. Is he my father? Nancy felt her world tilt. She'd known this moment was coming. Maxwell. Is he? Maxwell's voice rose. Because he looks like me, and you're acting weird, and he knows your name, and you're both lying, and I'm not stupid, Mom. I know when adults are hiding something. Nancy's defenses crumbled. It's complicated, sweetheart. That's not an answer, I know. So answer me. Maxwell's eyes filled with tears. Please, Mom, just tell me the truth. Is Jonathan Cooney my dad? Nancy opened her mouth. But before she could answer, before she could decide whether to keep lying or finally set the truth free, Joseph appeared. Nancy, we need you. Multi-vehicle rollover, 5 minutes out. Nancy looked between her son and the charge nurse. Go, Maxwell said quietly. I'll stay here, with him. Maxwell, I'm not leaving, Mom. Not until I know. Nancy saw the determination in his face. The same determination Jonathan once had. Don't ask him anything, Nancy warned. He's still heavily medicated. And Maxwell. She caught his arm. Whatever you think you know. We need to talk about it. Together. When I get back. Maxwell nodded, but his eyes were already drifting back toward Recovery Bay 4. Back toward the father he'd never met. Nancy watched him disappear through the doorway, heart pounding. She was out of time. The truth was coming, and nothing could stop it now. But here's what Maxwell didn't know yet. What was about to happen in that recovery room would either heal a family or destroy it completely. And if you've ever wondered what it feels like when a child confronts the parent who abandoned them, keep watching. Because this moment, it's the one that changes everything. Maxwell stood in the doorway of Recovery Bay 4 for a long moment, watching Jonathan's chest rise and fall. His mom said not to ask questions. But Maxwell had been collecting questions his entire life. 12 years of wondering why he didn't have a father. And now, for the first time ever, someone who might have answers was lying right in front of him. Maxwell reached into his jacket pocket and felt the worn edges of the photograph. He'd found it 3 weeks ago while looking for batteries in his mom's dresser. hidden beneath old textbooks, tucked inside an envelope with no address. The photo showed his mom younger, laughing, radiant, wrapped in the arms of a man with green eyes and dark hair, and a smile that looked like it could light up the world. She looked happy, truly, completely happy. Maxwell had never seen her look that way in real life. When he'd asked about it, she'd given him that sad smile and said, "That was a long time ago, sweetheart, before you were born." But later that night, Maxwell heard her crying in her bedroom. And he'd known. This man wasn't just some old boyfriend. He was something more, something that still hurt. Maxwell stepped into the room and approached Jonathan's bedside. "You still awake?" Maxwell asked quietly. Jonathan's eyes opened slowly, still glassy, but more focused than before. "Hey, kid." His voice was rough. "Shouldn't you be home sleeping?" "Can't sleep." Maxwell pulled the chair closer. "My brain won't stop thinking." "Yeah," Jonathan said with understanding. "I get that." Silence. Monitors beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a patient moaned. "Can I ask you something?" Maxwell finally said. "Sure. Do you believe in, like, knowing people you've never met?" Jonathan's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Like when you meet someone, and it feels familiar, like you've known them before, even though you haven't." Jonathan studied him carefully. "Yeah, I believe in that. That's how I felt," Maxwell said softly. "When I saw you on the runway. After the crash, everyone was yelling, and I was supposed to stay back, but I just couldn't. I ran to you. And when I saw your face," he paused. "It felt like coming home." Jonathan's eyes glistened. "Maxwell. And then, you said my mom's name, in your sleep. And she looked at you like she'd seen a ghost she used to love." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Your mom and I, we have history." "What kind of history?" "The kind that ends badly." "Why did it end?" Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. "Because I was young and scared and stupid, and I listened to the wrong people." Maxwell reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. "Is this you?" Jonathan's eyes widened. The photo showed him and Nancy on the beach at sunset, her in his arms, both laughing, his chin resting on her head. They looked impossibly young. Impossibly happy. "Where did you get that?" Jonathan whispered. "I found it in my mom's dresser. She hid it under her old textbooks." Maxwell's voice dropped. "I saw her crying over it one night. She didn't know I was watching. She just sat there holding it and crying." Jonathan's face crumpled. "God, Nancy. She never talks about you." Maxwell continued. "But I know you're important. I know you hurt her. And I know," he took a shaky breath, "I know she never really moved on. Maxwell, and I look like you." Maxwell set the photograph on the bedside table. Same eyes. Same face shape. Same expressions. My robotics coach said I reminded him of someone once, a tech CEO he saw give a keynote. Jonathan Cooney. Jonathan went very still. "I looked you up," Maxwell admitted. "After I found the photo, I Googled you, read articles, watched interviews, and the more I learned, the more I recognized myself. Your mannerisms, the way you talk when you're excited about code." "Maxwell, stop. Are you my father?" The question hung in the air like shattered glass. Jonathan stared at Maxwell, this brilliant, brave 12-year-old who just asked the most devastating question of both their lives. "I don't know," Jonathan whispered. "Nancy she never told me." "But it's possible, right?" Maxwell pressed. "The timeline fits. 12 years ago, you and my mom were together. And then you weren't. And then I was born." Jonathan's hands were shaking. "When's your birthday?" "August 17th. Jonathan did the math. His face went pale. "That would make conception around." He trailed off. "Late November, early December." "When did you break up with my mom?" "December 3rd. Jonathan's voice cracked. 12 years ago. Maxwell nodded slowly. "She found out she was pregnant in December. I know because I saw the ultrasound date. December 18th. 6 weeks along." Jonathan looked like he'd been punched. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew she was pregnant, and I walked away." "Did you know?" Maxwell asked. "About me?" "No." Jonathan's voice broke completely. "I swear to God, Maxwell. I didn't know. Nobody told me. Nancy never." He stopped. My father. What? My father came to see her, after I left. He told me she'd moved on, that she was fine, that I needed to focus on the company and forget about her. Jonathan's jaw clenched. He lied. He must have known. He must have threatened her, or paid her off, or, she wouldn't take money, Maxwell said quietly. My mom doesn't work that way. Jonathan looked at him with something like wonder. You defend her. She's been everything to me. Mom, dad, best friend. She worked double shifts so I could go to robotics camp. She never once made me feel like I was missing anything. But you were, Jonathan whispered, missing something. Maxwell's eyes filled with tears. I always wondered why I didn't have a dad. All my friends had dads, even the divorced ones, but mine just didn't exist. And when I'd ask my mom, she'd get this look, like I'd stabbed her. So I stopped asking. Jonathan reached out with a trembling hand. Maxwell, I told myself it didn't matter, that I was fine with just her, and I was. I am. She's amazing. Maxwell wiped his eyes, but there was always this empty space, this wondering, this feeling that half of me was missing and I'd never know why. Jonathan's tears spilled over. If I had known, he said fiercely. If anyone had told me you existed, Maxwell, I would have been there. I would have fought my father. I would have given up everything, the company, the money, all of it to be your dad. Really? Really? Jonathan's voice was raw. You're God. Just looking at you. I can see it. You're mine. Aren't you? You're my son. Maxwell nodded, tears streaming. I think so. I've always thought so. Ever since I found that photo. Jonathan extended his hand. Maxwell took it. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted. A bond that should have formed 12 years ago finally clicked into place. Father and son. Finally, impossibly connected. I'm sorry, Jonathan whispered. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. It wasn't your fault, Maxwell said. You didn't know. But I should have fought harder. I should have checked on her. The door opened. Nancy stood frozen in the doorway, still in scrubs, face pale with exhaustion. Her eyes moved from Jonathan to Maxwell, to their hands clasped together, to the photograph on the bedside table, to the tears on both their faces. Maxwell, she whispered, what did you do? I asked him the truth, Mom. Maxwell's voice was steady, despite the tears. I asked him if he's my dad. Nancy's face crumbled. Jonathan turned to her, expression pleading, desperate, demanding. Nancy, he said hoarsely. Is he mine? Nancy stood there, caught between the man she'd loved and lost, and the son she'd raised alone. Between the past that destroyed her and the present about to explode. Nancy, Jonathan said again, voice breaking. Please, I need to know. Is Maxwell my son? And Nancy realized the walls she'd built were about to come crashing down. The truth was here, and there was nowhere left to hide. Nancy's legs felt like they might give out. She'd survived gunshot wounds, cardiac arrests, patients coding on her table. She'd survived Jonathan walking away, survived labor alone, survived 12 years of single motherhood. But standing in this doorway, seeing her son holding his father's hand, seeing the truth written across both their faces, this might actually break her. Nancy, Jonathan said again, voice raw with desperation. Is Maxwell my son? The question hung between them like a blade. Maxwell's eyes were locked on her, pleading. Jonathan's were locked on her, demanding. Both waiting for the words that would change everything. Nancy's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper, but it landed like an earthquake. He's yours, Jonathan. Maxwell is your son. Jonathan made a sound, half sob, half gasp, like all the air had been punched from his lungs. His free hand came up to cover his mouth, eyes squeezing shut, tears streaming down his temples into the bandages. Oh God, he choked out. Oh my God. Maxwell's grip on his father's hand tightened. Nancy moved into the room on autopilot, her nursing instincts screaming at her to check Jonathan's vitals, to make sure the emotional shock wasn't spiking his blood pressure. But her hands wouldn't work. Her professional mask had finally shattered. How long have you known? Jonathan's eyes opened, red and furious and devastated. How long, Nancy? Since December 18th, 12 years ago. 12 years, Jonathan's voice rose. 12 years and you never told me? Never called? Never sent a letter, or, you left. Nancy's own anger erupted. You walked out on me, Jonathan. You chose your company over us, before you even knew there was an us. What was I supposed to do? Chase after you? You were supposed to tell me I had a son. You were supposed to stay. The words ricocheted off the walls like bullets. Maxwell flinched, pulling his hand back, eyes wide with fear. Nancy saw it and forced herself to breathe, to lower her voice, to remember that her son was watching his entire world rearrange itself. And this is the moment where most people ask, could you forgive someone who abandoned you? Could you let them back in after they chose wrong? Because what happens next in this room will either destroy this family or save it. And honestly, I need you to see which one it is. I tried to tell you, Nancy said quietly, voice shaking. The night before you left, I said I needed to talk to you about something important. Do you remember? Jonathan's face palled. You said we needed to talk about our future. And you said you didn't have time, that your investors were pulling out, that everything was falling apart, that you couldn't handle one more thing. So you just never told me? I was going to. Nancy's tears came now. I was going to tell you the next morning. But when I woke up, you were packing. You were leaving. And you looked so... Her voice cracked. You looked so relieved to be escaping me. I wasn't escaping you. Then what were you doing, Jonathan? Nancy demanded. Because from where I stood, the man I loved took one look at pressure and ran. So forgive me if I didn't think adding a baby to your stress would make you suddenly want to stay. Jonathan's jaw clenched. You should have told me anyway. Why? So you could resent me more? Resent the baby? So your father could... Nancy stopped abruptly. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. What about my father? Nancy looked away. Nancy, what about my father? He came to see me, she finally admitted, 3 days after you left. Jonathan went very still. What did he say? That you had a future worth $50 million. That a baby didn't fit into that equation. That if I really cared about you, I'd let you build your empire without distractions. Distractions, Jonathan repeated, voice hollow. His word, not mine. What else? Nancy hesitated. He said, your family had lawyers, resources, power. That if I tried to claim paternity or child support, they'd bury me. That I'd never see a penny, and I'd lose Maxwell in the process. Jonathan's face transformed rage, replacing devastation. He threatened you? Yes. And you believed him? Of course I believed him, Nancy shouted. Your father was Richard Cooney. He destroyed competitors for sport. You think I stood a chance against him? A nursing resident with student loans and no family? He would have crushed me, Jonathan. And he would have taken Maxwell. So you just let me miss everything? Jonathan's voice broke. His first words? His first steps? 12 years, Nancy. You stole that from me. I protected him from you. The words came out harsher than Nancy intended. Jonathan recoiled like she'd slapped him. From me? He whispered. Nancy's chest heaved. From your world. From your family. From growing up feeling like a mistake or a burden. I protected him from all of that. By telling him he didn't have a father at all? By giving him one parent who showed up completely, instead of two parents who resented him. I would never have resented him. How was I supposed to know that? Nancy screamed. You couldn't even handle a struggling startup and a girlfriend. How was I supposed to trust you with a baby? The room fell silent, except for harsh breathing and steady monitor beeps. Maxwell sat frozen in his chair, face pale, tears streaming silently. And that's when Nancy remembered. This wasn't about her and Jonathan. This was about their son. Maxwell, Nancy whispered, moving toward him. But Maxwell pulled back, standing abruptly. Do you still want me? He asked, voice small and broken. Jonathan's head snapped toward him. What? Now that you know. Maxwell's chin trembled. Do you still want me? Or does Mom have to protect me from you too? Jonathan's face crumpled completely. He extended both hands toward Maxwell, palms up, shaking. Come here, he said hoarsely. Please, Maxwell, come here. Maxwell hesitated, glancing at his mother. Nancy nodded through her tears. Maxwell moved slowly back to the bedside. Jonathan reached up and pulled him close carefully, mindful of injuries, but desperately. I want you more than anything, Jonathan whispered into Maxwell's hair. More than any company or money or success. More than my own life. Do you understand me? You're my son, and I will spend the rest of my life making up for the 12 years I missed." Maxwell sobbed against his father's shoulder. Jonathan held him tighter, one hand cradling the back of Maxwell's head. "I'm sorry," Jonathan said, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you grew up wondering. I'm sorry for all of it." "It wasn't your fault," Maxwell choked out. "You didn't know, but I should have." Jonathan pulled back slightly, looking into Maxwell's green eyes. "I should have checked on your mom. I should have made sure she was okay. I should have fought my father. I failed you both." Nancy sank into the chair, watching father and son cling to each other, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. Jonathan looked up at her, expression raw. "I know you hate me," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But Nancy, I need you to understand something." "What?" "I never stopped loving you. Not for one single day in 12 years. I built everything, the company, the money, the empire, trying to fill the space you left. But nothing ever did." Nancy's breath caught. "And now I find out I have a son." Jonathan's voice shook. "The most incredible son. And I missed 12 years because I was too much of a coward to fight for what mattered. Because I let my father manipulate me. Because I was weak." "You were scared," Nancy corrected softly. "There's a difference. Scared, weak. Same result." Jonathan looked down at Maxwell. "But I'm not scared anymore. Not when it comes to him. Not when it comes to you. Jonathan, I know I can't undo the past, but I can be here now. I can be the father he deserves, if you'll let me." Maxwell looked up at Nancy, eyes pleading, and Nancy realized she'd reached the edge of control. She could keep protecting, keep building walls. Or she could let go, let Jonathan in, let their son have a father. "One step at a time," Nancy finally said. "You want to be his father? Prove it. Not with money or grand gestures. With showing up. With being present. With putting him first." "I will," Jonathan promised. "Every day. For the rest of my life." Nancy nodded slowly, knowing she'd just changed everything. The truth was out. The walls were down. And whatever came next, there was no going back. Maxwell looked between his parents, exhausted and overwhelmed, and cautiously hopeful. "Can I stay here tonight?" he asked quietly. "With both of you?" Nancy and Jonathan locked eyes. And despite everything, the pain, the anger, the 12 years of separation, they both nodded. "Yeah, sweetheart," Nancy whispered. "You can stay." Maxwell crawled back into the chair beside Jonathan's bed, keeping one hand in his father's, the other reaching for his mother's. Connecting them. The family that should have been. Finally, impossibly, together. Snow began falling at 4:17 a.m. Nancy noticed it first, soft flakes drifting past the window, catching orange parking lot lights. The kind of snow that made the world feel quieter, gentler. The hospital had finally calmed. The holiday chaos had settled into the particular stillness that only existed in the hours before dawn. Nancy stood at the window, watching snow accumulate on empty cars, feeling the adrenaline that had sustained her finally drain away. She was exhausted, emotionally hollowed out. Behind her, Maxwell slept fitfully in the chair, still holding his father's hand even in sleep. Jonathan was awake, watching them both with an expression Nancy couldn't quite read. Pain, yes. Regret, absolutely. But underneath, something that looked like wonder. "You should sleep," Nancy said quietly. "Can't," Jonathan replied. "If I sleep, I might wake up and find out this was all a morphine dream." Nancy turned to face him. "It's not a dream." "No." Jonathan's eyes moved to Maxwell. "It's a miracle I don't deserve." Nancy moved to check his vitals, muscle memory, the safe ritual of nursing. Blood pressure slightly elevated, but stable. Heart rate, good. "How's the pain?" she asked clinically. "Manageable." "On a scale of—" "Nancy." Jonathan caught her wrist gently. "Stop." She froze. "Stop hiding behind the nurse," he said softly. "Please, just for a minute. Just be Nancy." She wanted to pull away, wanted to retreat behind professional boundaries. But she was so tired of hiding. Nancy sank into the chair opposite Maxwell, suddenly unable to hold herself upright. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Do what?" "This." She gestured between them. "Co-parenting with someone I haven't spoken to in 12 years. Letting you into Maxwell's life. Trusting that you won't she stopped. Won't what? Won't leave again. Nancy's voice broke. Because I can survive you breaking my heart, Jonathan. I already did that. But if you break his, I won't. Jonathan's voice was fierce, despite his weakness. Nancy, I swear to you, I won't leave him. Even if you hate me forever, even if you never forgive me, I will be his father, no matter what. Nancy studied his face, searching for the lie, the hesitation, but all she saw was determination. You built an empire, she said quietly. After you left, Cooney Technologies is worth billions. You became everything your father wanted. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Yeah, and it cost me everything that mattered. Did it? I have money I'll never spend. A company that runs itself. A penthouse that feels like a mausoleum. Jonathan's eyes met hers. I built an empire, Nancy, but I lost my heart 12 years ago and never got it back. Nancy's chest ached. You could have come back, she whispered. Any time in 12 years. I tried. Jonathan's admission came out raw. After my father died 5 years ago, after I found out how much he'd lied, I hired investigators. They said you'd moved, changed your contact information, you'd gone ghost. I had to, Nancy said. Your father kept tabs on me. Even after you left, I'd see his people watching Maxwell's school. I couldn't risk him deciding to claim custody. He would have, Jonathan said bitterly. My father would have destroyed you just to prove he could. He paused. I'm sorry, Nancy. For him. For all of it. You loved him. I feared him, Jonathan corrected. There's a difference. And I let that fear make me weak. Nancy felt tears slip down her cheeks. I was angry at you for so long, she admitted. For leaving. For choosing wrong. For making me raise Maxwell alone. But after a while, the anger faded, and all that was left was grief. For what we could have been. We could still. Jonathan, don't. Why not? Because we're not those people anymore. Nancy wiped her eyes. You're a billionaire CEO. I'm a single mother and an ER nurse. We're not 23 and in love anymore. Two people who made a child. Jonathan interrupted gently. Two people who clearly never stopped caring. Two people who might deserve a second chance. Nancy's breath caught. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that second chances existed outside fairy tales. But wanting something didn't make it real. I'm scared, Nancy whispered. Of what? Of letting you in and having you leave again. Of Maxwell getting attached and losing you. She swallowed hard, of hoping. Jonathan reached across the bed with his free hand. Nancy stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, solid, real. I would have chosen differently, Jonathan said quietly. If I'd known you were pregnant, I would have told my father to go to hell. I would have stayed. You can't know that. Yes, I can. His grip tightened. Because the moment I saw Maxwell, before I knew he was mine, something in me recognized him. And when he asked if I was his father, Nancy, my first thought wasn't panic. It was hope. Nancy's tears came faster. He's amazing, Jonathan continued, glancing at their sleeping son. Brilliant and brave and kind. Everything good in me and you, combined. You did that. You raised him to be extraordinary. I wasn't keeping him from you, Nancy said, through her tears. I was protecting him from your world. I know. Jonathan brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. And you were right to protect him. But Nancy, I'm not my father, and I don't want his world. I want the world you built. With Maxwell. With you, if you'll let me. Jonathan. I'm not asking for forever tonight, he said quickly. I'm just asking for a chance. Let me be his father. Let me prove I can show up. Nancy looked at Maxwell, their son, sleeping peacefully, connected to both his parents for the first time. And she realized she'd already lost this fight. Because Maxwell deserved a father who wanted him. One step at a time, Nancy finally said. One step at a time, Jonathan agreed. You prove you can be consistent, present, reliable. I will. You put Maxwell first. Always. Nancy. Jonathan squeezed her hand. I will put him first. I promise you. On everything I have, everything I am. I will be the father he deserves. Nancy studied his face and saw the truth there. Maybe he would fail. Maybe second chances were foolish. But maybe, just maybe, some broken things could be repaired. Okay, she whispered. One step at a time. Jonathan exhaled in relief, tears streaming down his face. They sat in silence for a long while, hands clasped across the bed, watching their son sleep. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, something fragile and precious began to take root. Hope. At 5:43 a.m., Maxwell stirred slightly, mumbling in his sleep. Jonathan reached down with his free hand and smoothed the hair back from Maxwell's forehead. Then, so gently it was almost imperceptible, he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to his son's temple. "I've got you now," Jonathan whispered. "I've got you, and I'm never letting go." Nancy watched from across the bed, her heart breaking and healing in the same moment. This was the man she'd loved, tender, fierce, capable of profound love when he wasn't drowning in fear. Maybe he really had changed. Maybe they really could do this. Maxwell's hand tightened around Jonathan's in sleep, and a small smile ghosted across his face. Like even unconscious, he knew he was finally whole. As dawn began breaking through winter clouds, painting the recovery bay in shades of pink and gold, Nancy allowed herself to believe in the impossible. They were a family now, broken and complicated and held together by hope and second chances, but a family nonetheless. And you know what? I've learned something covering stories like this for years. The families that survive aren't the perfect ones. They're the ones who choose each other even after everything falls apart. They're the ones who rebuild. And if you've got a story about second chances, about family coming back together against all odds, drop it in the comments, because those stories, they remind us what's possible. Nancy woke to her phone vibrating against the laminate arm of the hospital chair. She dozed off around 6 a.m., head tilted at an awkward angle, still holding Jonathan's hand across the bed. The phone buzzed again. Nancy pulled her hand free and checked the screen. 15 missed calls, 23 text messages, all from numbers she didn't recognize. Her stomach dropped. She stepped into the hallway and opened the first text. "Is it true Jonathan Cooney has a secret son?" Then another. "ER nurse Nancy Kim, who is she to the billionaire CEO?" And another. "Source confirms mystery. Boy at crash scene. Cooney heir?" Nancy's hands started shaking. No, 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 no. She pulled up a news site, and her worst fears materialized. Breaking. Tech billionaire Jonathan Cooney critical after runway crash, mystery child by his side. The article was sparse on details but heavy on speculation. A blurry photo showed paramedics wheeling Jonathan into County General, and beside the stretcher, partially obscured but unmistakable, was Maxwell. Nancy's vision blurred with panic. She'd protected Maxwell's identity for 12 years. 12 years of staying off social media, of keeping their life small and private and safe. And in one night, that protection had shattered. Nancy? She spun to find Joseph approaching, expression grim. "We've got a problem," he said quietly. "Media trucks showed up 20 minutes ago. Security's keeping them at the main entrance, but they're asking about the boy." "Oh God." Nancy pressed her palm against the wall. Jensen's handling press for now standard patient privacy response. "But Nancy," Joseph hesitated. "If that kid is connected to Jonathan Cooney, this is going to get ugly fast." Nancy couldn't breathe. This was exactly what she'd feared. Why she'd hidden. Why she'd built walls around Maxwell since birth. The Cooney world was coming for them, and she couldn't stop it. But here's what the media doesn't understand, and what most people don't realize until it's too late. When powerful families feel threatened, they don't just protect themselves. They eliminate the threat. And right now, Maxwell was that threat. What happens next will show you exactly how brutal that world can be. By 8 a.m., the hospital had transformed into a circus. Security cordoned off the entire recovery wing. Reporters camped outside. Nancy's phone wouldn't stop ringing. And then the lawyers arrived. 3 of them, dressed in suits that cost more than Nancy's monthly salary, striding through the hospital like they owned it. "We're here on behalf of the Cooney family," the lead attorney announced to Jensen. "We need to speak with Jonathan Cooney immediately regarding the media situation." "Mr. Cooney is still in recovery," Jensen replied coolly. "No visitors except immediate family. We represent his interests." "Then you can wait." Nancy watched from the nurse's station, heart hammering. She'd dealt with hospital lawyers before, cold, transactional. But Cooney lawyers were different. These people destroyed threats. And right now, Maxwell was a threat to the Cooney legacy. Joseph appeared at her elbow. There's also someone else here. Says she's Jonathan's mother, Victoria Cooney. Nancy's blood turned to ice. Victoria Cooney. Nancy had never met her. Richard had made sure of that. But she knew the stories. Where Richard had been ruthless, Victoria was calculating. Where is she? Nancy asked. Waiting area. Security won't let her back without Jonathan's consent. Nancy needed to wake him. Warn him. She rushed back to Recovery Bay 4. Maxwell was awake now, sitting up, scrolling through his phone with wide, frightened eyes. Mom, I'm on the news, he whispered. My face is on the news. Nancy's heart shattered. I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Jonathan was awake too, already trying to sit up despite his injuries, fury etched across his face. I saw, he said grimly. The media vultures found us. It's worse than that, Nancy said. Your family's lawyers are here, and your mother. Jonathan's expression darkened. My mother's here? In the waiting area. Don't let her near Maxwell. Jonathan's voice was sharp, protective. I mean it, Nancy. Don't let her anywhere near him until I can. The door opened, and Victoria Cooney swept in like a winter storm. Elegant, controlled, dangerous. She was in her 60s, but looked 50, dressed in designer clothes, silver hair pulled into a flawless chignon. Her eyes, Jonathan's eyes, swept the room with surgical precision, landing first on Jonathan, then on Nancy, then on Maxwell. So it's true, Victoria said quietly. Mother, Jonathan's voice was ice. You need to leave. I need to leave? Victoria's laugh was brittle. Jonathan, there are reporters outside claiming you have a secret child. A child whose mother appears to be a hospital nurse, with questionable motives. I'm not leaving until I understand what's happening. What's happening is none of your business. You're my son. Your reputation is my business. The company's reputation is my business. And this, she gestured toward Maxwell, this situation could destroy everything your father built. Good. Jonathan's voice was savage. I hope it does. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Jonathan? His name is Maxwell, Jonathan interrupted. He's 12 years old. He's brilliant and kind, and everything I should have been. And he's my son. The room went silent. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment, shock flickering across her face before the mask returned. You have a son, she repeated slowly. Yes, and you never told us. I didn't know. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Because your husband threatened his mother. Because Dad paid her to disappear. Because this family destroys anything that doesn't fit into its perfect corporate image. Victoria's gaze shifted to Nancy. Is this true? Nancy lifted her chin. Your husband told me I wasn't good enough for your son. That a baby would ruin his future. That if I pursued paternity or support, he'd take Maxwell from me. So yes, Mrs. Cooney, it's true. And you believed him. I was 23, broke, and terrified. Of course I believed him. Victoria studied Nancy for a long, calculating moment. Then, she looked at Maxwell, who'd pressed himself against the far wall, trying to disappear. Come here, child, Victoria said, not unkindly. Maxwell didn't move. Mother, I said leave him alone. Jonathan, I'm not a monster. Victoria's voice softened slightly. I simply want to see my grandson. He's not your anything, Nancy said fiercely. Not until you prove you're not like Richard. Not until you prove you won't try to control him. Or what? Love him? Victoria's eyes flashed. Do you really think so little of me? I think you spent 12 years not caring that your son was broken. Nancy shot back. I think you let Richard destroy us. Without question. So forgive me if I don't trust your sudden interest in Maxwell. Victoria absorbed the blow without flinching. You're right, she said quietly. I let Richard make decisions I should have questioned. I knew he'd gone to see you, Nancy. I knew he'd made threats. I said nothing, because I chose my marriage over my son's happiness. I told myself Richard knew best. That the company mattered most. Her voice hardened. I was wrong. And after he died 5 years ago, I found evidence letters. Notes showing just how much he'd manipulated. By then, I thought it was too late. I thought Jonathan had moved on. I didn't know about Maxwell. Jonathan stared at his mother, clearly not expecting that admission. But I'm here now, Victoria continued. And those lawyers out there? They're not representing me. They're representing the board, the shareholders, the people who see Maxwell as a liability rather than a blessing. She turned to Nancy. Which means you need protection. Both of you do. We don't want your protection, Nancy said. You need it anyway. Victoria's voice turned sharp. Because the moment those reporters identify Maxwell, they'll start digging into your life. They'll paint you as a gold digger. They'll question Maxwell's legitimacy. They'll make your lives hell. Nancy felt her legs weaken, because Victoria was right. So what do you want? Jonathan asked coldly. I want to protect my grandson, Victoria said simply. Let me handle the media. Let me handle the board. Let me make this right. In exchange for what? In exchange for being allowed to know him, Victoria looked at Maxwell again. I've missed 12 years. I'd like to not miss the rest. Maxwell glanced at Nancy, silently asking permission. Nancy wanted to say no, wanted to keep Maxwell far away from the Cooney machine. But Jonathan spoke first. If you try to control him, Jonathan said quietly, if you try to change him or mold him into some Cooney heir, I will cut you out of our lives permanently. Do you understand? Victoria met her son's eyes. I understand. And if you threaten Nancy again, I won't. Victoria's voice was firm. She protected my grandson when I failed to. That deserves respect, not threats. Jonathan looked at Nancy, silently asking her opinion. Nancy studied Victoria Cooney, the woman who'd stood by while Richard destroyed their lives, now claiming she wanted to make amends. Trust didn't come easy. But maybe for Maxwell's sake she needed to try. One step at a time, Nancy said carefully. You help us handle the media. We'll see about the rest. Victoria nodded. One step at a time. She turned and left, heels clicking authoritatively down the hallway. The moment the door closed, Maxwell exhaled shakily. Is she going to try to take me away? He whispered. Jonathan reached out immediately. No, never. I won't let anyone take you from your mom, I promise. But she's powerful. So am I. Jonathan's voice was steel. And I will use every resource I have to protect you both. The media, the lawyers, the board, my mother, none of them get to hurt you. Not anymore. Nancy watched Jonathan transform from patient to protector, saw the fierce determination in his eyes. He'd finally chosen them. Not the company, not the legacy, not the Cooney name. Them. And maybe, just maybe, that choice would be enough to survive what was coming. Jonathan was discharged on December 27th, with strict orders to rest, avoid stress, and follow up with neurosurgery in 2 weeks. He ignored the first 2 directives immediately. Instead of returning to his penthouse downtown, he checked into a small hotel 3 blocks from Nancy's apartment, close enough to see Maxwell daily, far enough to respect boundaries. You don't have to do this, Nancy told him as he signed the hotel registry. Yes, I do, Jonathan replied simply. I've missed 12 years, I'm not missing another day. And he didn't. Every morning, Jonathan showed up at Nancy's apartment with coffee and breakfast. Every afternoon, he and Maxwell disappeared into the hotel's business center, laptops open, talking code and algorithms. Every evening, Jonathan asked Nancy's permission to stay for dinner. She said yes every single time. The first real father-son project happened on December 29th. Maxwell had mentioned wanting to build a delivery drone for his robotics team. Jonathan's eyes had lit up like Christmas morning. I can help with that. So they'd spread components across Nancy's kitchen table circuit boards, motors, tiny propellers, sensors that cost more than Nancy's monthly grocery budget. Nancy watched from the doorway as Jonathan explained flight stabilization algorithms, his hands moving animatedly, Maxwell hanging on every word. See, the gyroscope tells the drone which way is up, Jonathan said. But the accelerometer measures actual movement. You need both or it crashes, Maxwell finished, grinning. Exactly. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, soldering connections, testing motors, Jonathan's hands guiding Maxwell's when precision was needed. Dad, Maxwell said quietly. Jonathan froze. It was the first time Maxwell had called him that. Yeah, buddy? I'm glad you didn't die in the crash. Jonathan's throat tightened. Me too. Because I've been waiting my whole life to meet you. And it would have really sucked if you died before we got to do this. Jonathan set down the soldering iron and pulled Maxwell into a tight hug. I'm not going anywhere, he promised. Not ever again. Maxwell hugged him back fiercely. Nancy turned away before they could see her crying. The media frenzy died down after Victoria Cooney released a carefully worded statement confirming Maxwell's existence and requesting privacy for the family. The board of Cooney Technologies tried to pressure Jonathan into damage control, public appearances, strategic interviews, image rehabilitation. Jonathan told them exactly where they could shove their damage control. "My son is not a PR problem," he'd said during a tense video conference. "He's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And if the shareholders don't like it, they can sell." Nancy had felt something shift inside her chest when she heard that. This wasn't the Jonathan who'd run from responsibility. This was someone new, someone who'd learned what mattered. On New Year's Eve, Jonathan asked if he could take Maxwell to the hotel rooftop to watch fireworks. Nancy almost said no, protective instinct kicking in. But then she saw Maxwell's hopeful face and Jonathan's patient waiting. "Be back by 12:30, she said. "We'll be back by midnight," Jonathan promised. "So Maxwell can ring in the new year with you too." They returned at 11:47. Maxwell buzzing with excitement. "Dad says I can visit his lab next week," Maxwell announced. "The actual Cooney Technologies facility. He says I can meet the robotics team and see the prototypes, and Mom, they're building autonomous vehicles." Nancy smiled at his enthusiasm, but her eyes were on Jonathan. He looked tired, still healing, but genuinely happy in a way she'd never seen before. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Jonathan nodded, understanding everything she couldn't say out loud. January 2nd was quiet. Maxwell was back at school, catching up on missed assignments and telling his robotics team about his really cool Christmas break. Nancy had the day off. Jonathan showed up at her apartment at 10 a.m. with 2 coffees and a question. "Can we talk? Just us?" Nancy's stomach flipped. "Okay." They sat on her small balcony despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching traffic move through the city. "I need to apologize," Jonathan started. "You already have. Not to Maxwell. To you." He turned to face her fully. "Nancy, I destroyed us. I let fear and pressure and my father's manipulation turn me into someone weak. Someone who walked away from the best thing in his life." Nancy's chest tightened. "And I can't undo that," Jonathan continued. "I can't get back those years, but I need you to know, every single day since I left, I've regretted it. Every success felt hollow. Every milestone felt empty. Because you weren't there to share it with." "Jonathan, I built an empire trying to fill the space you left," he said quietly. "But nothing worked. No amount of money or success could replace what I lost. What I threw away?" Nancy felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I was angry at you for so long," she admitted. "For leaving, for choosing wrong. But eventually, I realized you were just scared. We both were. Too young to navigate that much pressure. You navigated it fine. I had to. I had Maxwell depending on me." Nancy wiped her eyes. "But Jonathan, you need to understand, I can forgive the past. I can even understand it. But I can't go through it again. If you're going to be in our lives, you have to stay." "I won't leave." Jonathan took her hand. "Nancy, I swear to you, I'm not that scared kid anymore. I know what I want now. And what I want is a life that matters. A family. Maxwell. You." Nancy's breath caught. "Me? I never stopped loving you." Jonathan's voice cracked. "I buried it, tried to kill it, convinced myself it was just nostalgia. But the moment I saw you in that ER, Nancy, I knew. It never went away. It just waited." Nancy couldn't speak. "I'm not asking you to jump back into a relationship," Jonathan said quickly. "I know I have to earn that. But I need you to know I'm not here just for Maxwell. I'm here for you too. Because you're the other half of my heart. You always have been." Nancy looked at this man, older now, scarred by life and loss, but somehow more real than he'd been at 23. "I never stopped loving you either," she whispered. Jonathan's eyes widened. "I told myself I did," Nancy continued. "Convinced myself I'd moved on. But Jonathan, every man I tried to date, I compared to you. Every moment of happiness with Maxwell, I wished you were there. I buried my love for you so deep, I almost believed it was gone. But it wasn't. It was just waiting." Jonathan cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "We could try again," he said softly. Slowly. Carefully. Build something real this time. I'm terrified, Nancy admitted. Me too. What if we mess it up again? What if we don't? Nancy searched his eyes green like Maxwell's, but older, wiser, carrying the weight of years and mistakes transformed into determination. And she made a choice. She chose hope. Nancy leaned forward and kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, testing whether the connection still existed beneath all the years and pain. Jonathan kissed her back like he was coming home after a decade in the wilderness, desperate but reverent, hungry but gentle. His hands tangled in her hair. Her fingers gripped his jacket, and for a moment, they were 23 again, young and in love, and convinced they could conquer anything together. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying. One step at a time, Nancy whispered against his lips. One step at a time, Jonathan agreed. They sat together on the balcony for hours, talking about everything: Maxwell's future, Jonathan's company, co-parenting logistics, and slowly, carefully, what rebuilding their relationship might look like. Not rushing, not making grand promises, just two broken people learning how to be whole again. Together. And can I tell you something I've noticed after years of watching families rebuild? The ones who make it aren't the ones who pretend the past didn't happen. They're the ones who acknowledge the pain, forgive the failures, and choose each other anyway. If that resonates with you, if you believe broken families can heal, hit that like button. Because stories like this, they need to be told. That night, when Maxwell came home from school, he found his parents sitting on the couch together, not touching, but close, connected in a way that made the air feel different. Are you guys okay? Maxwell asked carefully. Nancy and Jonathan exchanged a look. Yes, sweetheart, Nancy said. We're okay. Better than okay, Jonathan added. Maxwell studied them both, a slow smile spreading across his face. Good, he said simply. Because I really don't want to have to choose between you. You'll never have to, Jonathan promised. We're a team now, all three of us. Maxwell nodded, satisfied, and disappeared into his room. Nancy leaned her head on Jonathan's shoulder. Jonathan wrapped his arm around her. And in that small apartment, with snow falling outside and the future uncertain but hopeful, they began building what they should have built 12 years ago. A family. Imperfect, complicated, held together by second chances and hard-won forgiveness. But real. Finally. Impossibly real. 3 weeks after the crash, Jonathan called a press conference. Not at Cooney Technologies headquarters, not in some sterile corporate boardroom, at County General Hospital, in the same lobby where his life had changed forever. Nancy stood in the back with Maxwell, watching Jonathan face a sea of cameras and reporters. Victoria seated behind him with an expression that somehow managed to be both proud and resigned. Thank you all for coming, Jonathan began, voice steady, despite the healing scar still visible at his hairline. I'm here today to address the speculation surrounding my personal life, specifically, the rumors about my son. The room erupted with questions. Jonathan raised his hand for silence. Maxwell Kim is my 12-year-old son. He is brilliant, kind, and the best thing that's ever happened to me. His mother, Nancy Kim, raised him with extraordinary dedication while I was absent, not by choice, but through a combination of manipulation, fear, and my own failures. Maxwell's hand tightened around Nancy's. I won't be taking questions about how or why this happened. Jonathan continued firmly. I won't be discussing custody arrangements or financial settlements because there are none. Nancy has been and will continue to be Maxwell's primary parent. I'm simply grateful she's allowing me the privilege of being his father now. A reporter shouted, Will Maxwell be the Cooney heir? Jonathan's expression hardened. Maxwell will be whatever he chooses to be. He's not a business asset, or an heir apparent, or a PR strategy. He's my son, and his childhood will be his own, free from corporate pressure, family expectations, or media scrutiny. Another reporter, what about your mother? Victoria Cooney has been vocal about family legacy. My mother, Jonathan interrupted, glancing back at Victoria, has agreed that Maxwell's well-being comes before any legacy. And if anyone in my family, board members, distant relatives, business associates, cannot respect that boundary, they will no longer be in our lives. Victoria met her son's eyes and nodded once. Jonathan faced the cameras again. I'm making this statement today to shut down speculation and protect my son's privacy. This is the only public comment I will make about my personal life. Anyone pursuing Maxwell for interviews, photographs, or information will face legal consequences. That's all." He stood and walked away from the podium, ignoring the shouted questions. Walked straight to Nancy and Maxwell. And in front of every camera and reporter in that room, he pulled them both into an embrace. The message was clear. This is my family, and they're not for sale. The board of CUNY Technologies attempted one last power play. An emergency meeting was called to discuss Jonathan's compromised judgment. Jonathan showed up to the video conference with a resignation letter already prepared. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I've spent 12 years building this company, and in doing so, I lost everything that actually mattered. So here's what's going to happen. I will continue running CUNY Technologies, but I will do so remotely when necessary, with boundaries, and with my family as my priority. If that's unacceptable, I resign effective immediately." The board members sputtered protests. "I am the majority shareholder," Jonathan reminded them coldly, "which means I decide what has value. And I've decided that my 12-year-old son teaching me about drone navigation is worth more than any quarterly earnings report. If you disagree, buy me out. Otherwise, this discussion is over." He ended the call before they could respond. Nancy, who'd been listening from the kitchen, walked in with raised eyebrows. "Did you just threaten to quit your billion-dollar company?" "No," Jonathan corrected with a slight smile. "I threatened to let them buy me out for significantly more than $1 billion if they kept interfering with my family." Nancy laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "You're crazy." "Probably." Jonathan pulled her close. "But I'm not losing you again. Not for a company. Not for anything." Nancy kissed him softly. "Good answer." Maxwell's robotics team won regionals in mid-January. Jonathan was in the front row, cheering louder than any other parent, filming every moment. Nancy sat beside him, watching her son accept the trophy with pure joy radiating from his face. "He's incredible," Jonathan whispered. "He is," Nancy agreed. "We made that." "We did." Jonathan took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Nancy, I need to ask you something." She turned to face him, suddenly nervous. "Okay, move in with me." Nancy blinked. "What? Not the penthouse?" "I already sold it." "Too cold." Jonathan spoke quickly. "I bought a house in Maxwell's school district. 4 bedrooms, so he can have his own space, and a workshop. A yard for whatever project he dreams up next. An actual kitchen where we can have family dinners." "Jonathan, I'm not asking you to marry me," he clarified quickly. "Not yet. I know we're still rebuilding trust. But, Nancy, I don't want to live 3 blocks away anymore. I want to wake up and have breakfast with you. I want to help Maxwell with homework. I want to be a family. Really, truly, a family." Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "That's a big step." "I know. And if you're not ready..." "I'm ready," Nancy interrupted. "God help me, I'm ready." Jonathan exhaled in relief, pulling her into a kiss that made the other robotics parents politely look away. When they pulled apart, Maxwell was standing in front of them, trophy in hand, grinning. "Are you guys finally together?" he asked. Nancy and Jonathan looked at each other and laughed. "Yeah, sweetheart," Nancy said. "We're together." "About time," Maxwell declared. "Can we get pizza to celebrate?" "Anything you want," Jonathan promised. And for the first time in 12 years, Maxwell looked at his parents, both of them, together, smiling at him with identical proud expressions, and felt completely, utterly whole. The last Sunday in January arrived cold and bright. They spent the morning in their new house boxes still unpacked, furniture still being arranged, but already feeling like home. Maxwell had been secretive all weekend, working on something in his room. After breakfast, he emerged carrying a carefully wrapped package. "Dad, I made you something." Jonathan looked up from his coffee, eyes softening. "Yeah, buddy?" Maxwell handed him the gift with unusual shyness. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Jonathan unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a handmade photo album. The first page showed the beach photograph young Jonathan and Nancy, impossibly happy. The second page showed Maxwell as a baby, with a note in his handwriting. "You weren't here, but you were loved anyway." The following pages were filled with pictures from Maxwell's childhood, first birthday, first day of school, robotics competitions, Christmas mornings, Each photo had a blank space next to it, and a caption, waiting for the next chapter. The final page showed a recent photo: Jonathan, Nancy, and Maxwell together on the couch, taken by Victoria during a family dinner. The caption read, Chapter 1, We Begin Again. Jonathan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Maxwell, he whispered, voice breaking. This is... I can't give you back the years you missed, Maxwell said quietly, but I can give you all the years ahead, if you want them. Jonathan pulled his son into a fierce hug, tears streaming down his face. I want them, he choked out. God, Maxwell, I want every single one. Nancy watched them, her own tears falling, and felt something settle in her chest. They were going to be okay. All of them. That afternoon, they went for a walk. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the neighborhood in fresh white, the kind of snow that made everything feel new, clean, possible. Maxwell ran ahead, trying to catch snowflakes on his tongue. Jonathan and Nancy walked hand in hand behind him, wrapped in warm coats and warmer hope. Are you happy? Jonathan asked, softly. Nancy looked at him, this man who'd broken her heart, and somehow, impossibly, helped her heal it. Yeah, she said, I am. Me too. Jonathan squeezed her hand. For the first time in 12 years, I actually feel like I belong somewhere. You do belong. With us. With you, Jonathan corrected, pulling her close. Always with you. Maxwell turned back, grinning, covered in snow. Come on, he shouted. You guys are so slow. Nancy and Jonathan laughed and hurried after him, their footsteps crunching in fresh powder. As they walked through the snow-covered streets, passing families and couples and the beautiful ordinary chaos of Sunday morning life, Nancy thought about miracles. She'd stopped believing in them years ago. Stopped believing that broken things could be mended. That lost people could be found. That second chances were real and not just fairy tale promises. But watching Jonathan throw a snowball at Maxwell while their son shrieked with laughter, watching them chase each other like children, watching her family, her actual, real family, be happy and whole and together. Maybe miracles did exist, just not the way anyone expected. They stopped at a small park, Maxwell immediately running toward the empty playground. Jonathan and Nancy sat on a bench, watching him swing higher and higher, his laughter carrying across the cold air. Thank you, Jonathan said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For raising him so well. For giving me this chance. Jonathan's voice was thick with emotion. For everything. Nancy leaned her head on his shoulder. You're doing the work, Jonathan. You're showing up. That's what matters. I'll keep showing up, he promised. Every single day. For the rest of my life. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their son play, and Nancy realized something profound. She'd spent 12 years building walls to protect Maxwell from the world that had hurt her. But maybe the world wasn't the enemy. Maybe fear was. And maybe, just maybe, choosing love over fear was the real miracle. The final reflection. Maxwell ran back to them, breathless and beaming, snow dusting his dark hair. Can we do this every Sunday? He asked. All three of us? Nancy and Jonathan looked at each other and smiled. Yeah, buddy, Jonathan said. Every Sunday. Promise? Promise. Maxwell threw his arms around both of them, squeezing tight. And in that moment, in that perfect, ordinary, miraculous moment, Nancy understood something she'd teach Maxwell someday, when he was old enough to hear it. Some miracles don't arrive with angels, or bells, or divine intervention. Some miracles arrive quietly. In emergency rooms at 3 a.m., when the person you thought you'd lost forever crashes back into your life. In sons who refuse to let go of hands that finally reached for them. In fathers who learn painfully, desperately to choose right after years of choosing wrong. In mothers who learn to trust again after trust was shattered. Some miracles arrive not with fanfare, but with the simple, profound return of the person you thought you'd lost forever. And the courage to build something better than what came before. Because that's what love is, really. Not the perfect fairy tale, not the flawless beginning, but the choice to keep building, to keep showing up, to keep believing that broken things can be made whole again. As they walked home through the snow, Maxwell between them, each parent holding one of his hands, Nancy felt a peace she hadn't known in 12 years settle over her. They weren't perfect. They weren't fixed. They were still learning how to be a family, how to navigate co-parenting and blended lives, and the complicated mess of loving someone who once hurt you. But they were trying. And trying, showing up, doing the work, choosing each other every single day, that was the real miracle. Jonathan caught Nancy's eye over Maxwell's head and smiled. She smiled back. And in that smile was everything. Forgiveness, and hope, and love, and the promise of a future they'd build together. One step at a time. One day at a time, one small miracle at a time. You know, I've spent years sharing stories like Nancy and Jonathan's. Stories about families that fell apart and somehow found their way back together. About parents who missed years and learned to make up for them. About love that survived when it shouldn't have. And every time I share one of these stories, hundreds of you write to me saying, "This is my story too. I lost someone I thought I'd never see again. I made mistakes I thought I could never fix. I gave up hope, and then hope found me anyway." Those messages, they're the reason I do this. Because these stories matter. They remind us that it's never too late. That second chances are real. That families can heal even after they break. If this story moved you, if you see yourself in Nancy or Jonathan or Maxwell, please share it. Share it with someone who needs to believe that broken things can be made whole. Share it with someone who's given up on second chances. Share it with someone who needs hope. And if you want more stories like this, stories about real people facing impossible situations and finding their way through, subscribe to this channel. Join this community of believers. Because we're all in this together, learning that miracles don't always look the way we expect. They look like ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Like Nancy choosing to let Jonathan in after years of protecting her heart. Like Jonathan choosing his son over his empire. Like Maxwell choosing to forgive the father who was never there. Those choices, they're the real miracles. And they happen every single day. To people just like you,